Hello, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody here today. Thank you so much for joining us here for this wonderful panel discussion. And my name is Zeljka Krsnik. As you can see, I'm chair of the Young IBRO Committee and member of ALBA Steering Committee and Executive Committee. I will just briefly introduce these two committees that are pretty new, and then we're going to have this panel discussion, and then after that we're going to have a networking event with some food and, as you can see, with some nice wine. So, as you can see, Young IBRO is a new committee recently established thanks to IBRO leadership, and the main issue that we want to address is the issue of early career and mid-career scientists. Our main issue is to advise executive committee on the problems that mid-career scientists are actually facing, and there are 10 of us from different IBRO regions, 2 of us per each IBRO region, and majority of them are actually here sitting in the audience. We had our first meeting last year in April, and we were trying to identify major problems that early career scientists are facing, and after brainstorming we came up with 3 new initiatives for 2019, and I'm going to just briefly show you all 3 of them. So the first initiative is Young IBRO Regions Connecting Award, in order to foster collaboration between different IBRO regions, between emerging scientists, emerging groups. The second one is we actually already established a website on our IBRO website with an open resource repository to support makers movement and to encourage open neuroscience. And the third, very important, is this partnership between Young IBRO and ALBA. And the ALBA Network is something new that you maybe heard of, maybe you didn't. So ALBA was recently also established, and it's a global network to promote equality and diversity in brain sciences. And we have, beside IBRO, we have different partners. One of them is FENS, and Society for Neuroscience, Federation of Balinese Brussels, FENS Kavli Foundation, Women in Neuroscience, and several more. They're growing. Steering committee is composed of scientists from all over the world, from Argentina, Canada, all around Europe to South Africa and China. And we have our Matilde, who is actually helping us in ALBA office in Brussels. The goal of ALBA Network is to promote best practices to counteract bias, to recognize outstanding contribution to science and diversity, and to provide networking and mentoring opportunities. And you will see that we have different activities. Some of them are already ready, and some of them are still in preparation. For example, we are working on best practice declaration, and we are establishing diversity in brain sciences awards. And we are working on different networking events around major neuroscience conferences, like this one, of course. And we are working on training and mentoring programs for women and minorities in brain research. So, as you can see, our first launching event was on FENS regional meeting in Belgrade in July this year. And after this event, there will be another event tomorrow in Prague, in Czech Republic, and then next month in Greece, and so on. And at the moment, we are already preparing some events for the next year that are going to take place in Brazil, in Washington, D.C., on SFN, and of course on FENS Forum in Glasgow in 2020. What we need from you, we want you to be involved in that. We want you to be involved in both initiatives, and we want you to write back to us, and we want to hear feedback from you. We want to hear your opinion, we want to hear your vision, and we want to incorporate these visions in our future decisions. This is regarding IBRO. Please visit our website and share your voice. And also, please go to our ALBA website, join us, because you can just fill questionnaire and you can be part of ALBA Network. You are going to receive all the emails regarding networking events worldwide. And now, let's return back to Depot. It is my great pleasure that I have the opportunity to announce the first keynote speaker. You know her. Her name is Tracy Bale. She is a professor of pharmacology at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and she's director of Center for Epigenetic Research in Child Health and Brain Development. She's very well respected for her research on stress as a risk factor for neurodevelopmental disorders. But importantly, beside all her outstanding research and awards that she received throughout her career, she's very passionately involved in education, in public engagement, and in outreach. It is my great honor and pleasure to announce our first keynote speaker, new IBRO President-elect Tracy Bale.
Thank you so much. That was very kind. So the focus of this discussion panel is on diversity and what diversity means and why it's valuable. And as I was putting together some of these slides and thinking about the programs that we've been working on in the city of Baltimore and how those scaled up are very similar to the interests that I'm hearing a lot about at this meeting tomorrow, including the focus on education globally, and thinking about what, not just that why diversity impacts for us, all of us in this room, to look around and see diversity. When you see a panel, and those who are involved on Twitter have seen a lot about the mantle. And I think as a woman in science, and especially as a more senior woman in science, I know Marina will agree with me on this, that I know she also feels very passionate about ensuring that our representation in scientific conferences get more involvement of seeing women equally represented in those panels, but also underrepresented minorities. And so I think this is becoming a conversation, but I think one of the things that we don't talk a lot about is not just how it's obvious to us why it's important for young trainees to see diversity on that panel as they work toward their career goals. But what does it help us in terms of neuroscience research? And I think that is something that's really important to think about. It doesn't just benefit us in terms of our careers and mentorship and trainees, but also its impact, because increasing diversity in neuroscience increases the breadth and the importance of our research outcomes. And I think that's a really critical thing to think about as we go forward in talking about what diversity means. And so this is just a bunch of statistics largely from the US, but I think it represents probably Europe as well. And looking at one of the issues in the US as an example is, of course, women and minorities as we go up the ladder. And so on the left side of the slide here, you can see that in the US, and I think this is probably overestimated statistics, frankly, but you note that in the pie chart above there, that if you look at the representation of just, this is for women who get PhDs in neuroscience, you can see the distribution, this is doctoral degrees in biological sciences, is more women than men. But if you look at the distribution in faculty, and I know at many of our Ivy League institutions, this is actually worse than these statistics are showing here, that we oftentimes see a higher percentage of women at the junior faculty level, which is 45-50%, which somewhat reflects those who are getting their PhDs. But by the time we get up to full professor, and these statistics do not take into account those who are in the tenure track, and those getting tenure would be much less. And that's something that we need to consider. And the statistics on the bottom right there, which you can't really see, are just numbers that show the percentage in terms of women who have obtained full professorship as a percentage of those in the field. And you can see that over the years, we have done better, right? I think the number there is getting towards 40% who are making it to the junior faculty level. But again, that how we progress and seeing the diversity through the upper levels, I think is critically important to how we think and how we train. And the numbers are even worse in the US for underrepresented minorities in STEM. And so if you look, again, underrepresented minorities in science and engineering, 9%, groups as a percentage of the US population are, of course, 33%-ish. But then if you look at African Americans specifically in the US employed in biological sciences, it's less than 5%. Not a statistic I am very proud of at all. And these other statistics on here just basically say the same thing, that we talk a lot about it, but the numbers are not really reflecting. We need to do better, for sure, and I know this is true around the world. So in the introduction, you heard that in addition to being a professor of psychiatry and pharmacology at Maryland, I'm also the director of a center that focuses a lot on child health and brain development. And one of the aspects, one of the missions of this center is not just the research or the translational research on the campus, but a huge piece of this is the community involvement and engagement. And why is that? And I think that reflects a lot about what we're talking about today. So the center on campus, as I developed it, has far reach within translational components into the hospitals for research with human patients, as well as in the bench. And so it's the translational, trying to get the two parts communicating, which is what this slide reflects. But the biggest piece and the biggest hurdle we have in the city of Baltimore, which is true for a lot of the big cities in the US and probably around the world, is that if you want to be engaged in translational research, you want to have representation of your community in your translational research, it's almost impossible to do in cities where, unfortunately, there has been a lot of previous history whereby the community itself doesn't have a lot of faith or trust in biomedical research. And I know that this is true around the world for a lot of areas. And how do you overcome that problem that has developed? And I know as part of this discussion, we're talking about diversity and what are the problems and how do we overcome them. Well, I've identified that in the city of Baltimore, for doing translational research and including the population that needs to be represented, this is very difficult. And so one of the ways that we're working toward this using the center is doing community engagement sorts of activities. So doing things out into the community, both in a public way. I interact with our city council within the city of Baltimore, doing science and society events, and I know a lot of you here in the audience do these sorts of things in your hometowns as well, but also really connecting in community engagement. And I want to stop for a second and discuss the difference between community engagement and outreach. And they're two very different things, and they are not to be interchanged. And oftentimes when you're trying to engage a community to try and discuss, I am a neuroscientist interested in the impact of the environment on brain development, brain maturation, effects on the brain such as trauma. To engage a community such as Baltimore, where there's a lot of violence, we have a lot of because of escalation of violence, because of the stress in the community, we have a lot of shootings that happen, a lot of children who have suffered a lot of trauma. In order for that community to understand what the research needs to be done to understand what can benefit a community, what trauma has a lasting effect, you needed to be able to engage with that. That's very different than outreach. Right, so I want to make that really clear. Engaging with the community so that they understand where you're coming from and you can learn a lot more about them as well. And I think that's important. So we've engaged in the community in multiple different ways. How that relates to research and why diversity in neuroscience really matters, I think, is something to consider around the world. That diversity in our representation is critically important for that which we are all studying, and understanding who you're studying, whether you're doing bench research or human studies, understanding the population of which you are dedicating your research to, I think, is important. One of the terms in the US, and I think around the world that people use, is adverse childhood events, is something that we're very interested in. This term was developed by Kaiser Permanente out of California. This was the idea that the traumatic experiences that happen in your life, when those traumatic experiences happened, and the number of those things that happened can be predictive of your disease risk. So this is something that they examined many years ago, and many of you have heard this term before. But understanding a population and things that they have experienced can tell you a lot about both the interactions that we have as a community and our colleagues, but also about the research that we're doing. So on the left here reflects the impacts that have been studied well now of the adverse childhood events and outcomes related to much of the research that we're talking about at this meeting in neuroscience. On the right is the study that has demonstrated basically that 4 or more adverse childhood events, especially those that occur prior to the onset of puberty, are the strongest predictors for all sorts of diseases, including neuropsychiatric disease. So why is that interesting? Well, this is just one example from the research that my lab does in the city that I live in. So the adverse childhood experiences. So if you take a pregnant woman and you want to understand influences of the environment on that developing fetus, whether it be intergenerationally or direct experiences and exposures, this is looking at the number of ACEs that any given pregnant woman experienced when she was growing up. Right, so these are her experiences on the left here. If you look at the average across the United States, you can see that that 4 or more ACEs mark, that yellow, is about 12.5%. That's average across the US. In the city of Baltimore, it's 61%. So if you are going to try and understand the influences and be doing research in a community, that's critically important to understand the population that you are dealing with. And I think that diversity, representation in the research and representation in our science is important. So we have begun by many different ways of reaching into the community, and I think this applies again globally, and thinking about the influence when asked. Underrepresented minorities in the U.S. have said what would have influenced their involvement or what most influenced their getting involved, being represented in this room in science, was that early engagement in STEM activities. And so I know that we're not here to talk about education at that level, but I do think it's something important to consider as we think about representation of diversity on our panels in our scientific community. So we've done this in Baltimore. We have a program called Reading on the Brain, and that is because if you're dealing with a very traumatized community, you need to have something positive to reflect when you go in and discuss that with the children, with the school, and with their families. Reading, it turns out, is a worldwide message for incredible influence and lasting impact on the brain. So this is all the different activities we've been doing in the schools in Baltimore. On the right there is a young third grader. Her name is Payton. She's this amazingly bright, precocious kid who was so interested in learning about her brain. We did a lot of activities with these kids throughout the year. We do science, we paired it up with art, which turned out to be this amazing way to teach them something and then do scientific experiments that are really fun. You know, pour acid into base. You guys remember those days from Explode, right? They love that. The other thing that was great was doing the liquid nitrogen soap bubbles. I mean, what kid doesn't love that? And just teaching them through science about the brain, through scientific experiments, and then we paired up with an artist who then reinforced that same message with art, and then that art became part of a project at the school, which was really reflecting the children, their thoughts, their ideas about Baltimore, what they wanted Baltimore to look like for them, and understanding and appreciating their lives in the arts, which was an amazing undertaking. I learned so much about the lives of these kids. This is one of the schools we're working with. This is Callaway Elementary School in Baltimore. This is not a pretty school. If I showed you pictures of the inside, you would not be impressed. All the water fountains in the school, as are all Baltimore City schools, are capped. There is limited access to water. They have to bring in bottles of water, and oftentimes, of course, it runs out for these kids. There's lots of hardships that they endure. Most of the kids get all 3 meals of their day at school because of lack of availability at home. So these are kids who live in very, very tough circumstances, and this was their school. So we decided to take all of this art and make it into a message not just for the kids, but about the kids and their story for the school, for their families, and more importantly, for the community. And so you can see the difference here in that this mural, we just celebrated the opening of this mural at Callaway, which was great. And so, unfortunately, you can't see all the pictures as well here, but you can see that all of the kids that participated are in the mural, and there's all kinds of information that they learned about the brain and neurons and flying around. And anyway, so this was a huge experience, and now every one of the kids that comes in, they're so proud of this. We had the mayor participated, came and painted with us. The news teams came and filmed it and put the kids on TV. They interviewed our kids. And so what that is now, it took a message again, and it put the kids in front of a camera where they were, the guy who was from the news interviewing them was just jaw-dropped at how much they learned about the brain. But now they're out in the news, and now that's out in the community as well. And so now Baltimore City has put forth what's called the Trauma Act, which basically says that if you grow up in an area where there's lots of violence and trauma, it's a very different way to educate. The finances that are required to educate kids is very different, and what they need and their resources that they need are very different. And so again, working in this community. And so when I was asked to speak here and thinking about diversity, I think it's so critically important that engage in this room, which I'd love to look at and see so much representation from around the world, that it also starts with the kids. I think that, we all are interested in the brain, but it starts with the kids and teaching the kids, and the kids then become interested in it, and that works its way up. And I think that's a message that's really important. And this is just from our recent celebration. And as you can see, we have representation. We have the kids, some of the kids from our program from last year, ones who will be in the program this year. Our artist is there. We have the Baltimore City Schools superintendent came. We have our dean there in the back row, second from the right, who's also African American, who is the dean of the medical school, came and participated. So it was a really amazing day to celebrate these kids and the message of diversity in science through art and science. And so our goal is to continue this message. And so the kids came in and they did science with us in the lab. And I just want to end with the fact that ALBA, which is so important for establishing sort of expectations that we all need to consider when putting together conferences, when considering promotions, when doing our hiring, means sunshine, right? And so this is a key part of our mural that I wanted to throw out there, which actually says that same message, a brightness for the city of Baltimore. And for those who haven't paid attention, the ALBA Network actually has a list of the goals to be achieved. I highly encourage you, if you had not looked at it, to consider all of those goals from the network and how to achieve them. And I know that that Dr. Magistretti is very interested also and has been very supportive of the ALBA Network. And when, as the incoming president, I absolutely want to continue that. I want to hear all of your ideas, thoughts, things that are working, and things that you think that could work better. I think we're all interested in trying to build that here. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Zeljka and Jacqueline and the ALBA Network. I mean, I'm inspired by, I have visited the website and it's really fantastic. So this is a very brief presentation and it'll actually give a reflection on my mini thesis that I conducted during my MBA. So yes, PhD, MBA. Got slightly bored and I was hitting a ceiling with my academic position and ranking. So I investigated it. So I focused on two key areas of diversity, and South Africa is pretty unique, and I'll touch on that now, is that we don't only have gender diversity issues, but we also have racial diversity issues, and that's significant. So the study took two quantitative as well as qualitative components to get more of an insight from senior academics, how they were perceiving the diversity issues that we're facing, and then also accessing HR with the support of the UCT executive to actually investigate. I'm used to projecting, so it's like, okay, no, it's okay. So, and then the qualitative, it's really there though, isn't it? So and then the quantitative components are getting human resources to support and provide data over 3.5 years. Unfortunately, I didn't know how much turnover there was at that time. So some of the analyses that I wanted to conduct were limited. So I couldn't look at the interaction between race as well as gender. So I couldn't look at across those. So if we look at this image over here, pretty similar to what Prof. Bale showed us, was actually, first off, actually before that, is that our population characteristics as identified by the South African government. So I'll be speaking about South Africa. When we initially look, I'm just going to enlarge it so I can't see it anything. Okay, so the very, so internal monologue, right? Okay, so 78% of individuals in the population. No, please don't. So 78% are classified as South African black individuals. So that's indigenous populations from South Africa. Then colored community, we in America and such would be referred to as mixed race, appropriate. In the South African context, if you are South African, that is a normal referral. So please don't take offense in any of the terminology. It is based on what is being used by the national government of South Africa. Then white population, so you can see the distribution, 78, 9%, 9%, 3%, and then 1% other, which refers to foreign nationals primarily. So South Africa presents with a unique history in that which the minority overshadowed the majority through colonization and decades of the apartheid regime. Therefore, the major difference South Africa faces is to serve the majority and reduce the minority representation, but specifically the white population in representation across all forms of industry. South African universities are mandated by government to create equity in their employment profiles to match that of national census. So what the government's also done is address all of those who were previously socioeconomically disadvantaged. And what they've done by that, or what that means, is that they've incorporated individuals who are listed as South African blacks, coloureds, as well as Indian populations. So they were previously, in the apartheid regime, they were disadvantaged. So then that even decreases our white individuals' percentile to the overall population. So 90% to 9%. And then the 1% still existing there for the foreign nationals. So with the mandate, UCT, there is a wish for this, there is a hope for this. So the translation, as we all know, is often missed. But UCT has implemented an employment equity plan to effect change. So in 2015, and these are available on the web, so it's in full disclosure, and the attempt is to be as transparent as possible to effect this effectively, is to increase the big umbrella black representation from 23% to 32%, and then black South Africans specifically, where we are struggling the most with, to actually bring them into academia and to actually hold them in, because it's also seen as a very negative environment to maintain and sustain and hold these individuals, because they're almost seen in some ways as a token. And a lot of pressure is also put on them. And we have seen that in devastating ways at the University of Payton. So then the aim is also to decrease the number of white academics by 4%, decrease the foreign nationals by 4%, and then overall increase the academic staffing by 6%. So in the study, I addressed two faculties in our university, just to get kind of a better impression than just focusing on one. So Commerce, which is where the Graduate School of Business is hosted, and then the Faculty of Health Sciences. And this was the distribution reported, and then so what we looked at, well, what I looked at, was the transformation of recruitment by race. So over the 3.5 years, this was the spread or the outlay of the distribution. So it's more of a reporting of what is effectively happening, and that is then saying that by, say, 3/3 of a pie each, black, white, other being foreign nationals. And that's often in the commerce faculty because they want to have people teaching foreign investment. So there are also specializations which require different forms of academic staffing. Then in the Faculty of Health Sciences, they are being effective in calling the black umbrella. However, when you actually do the distribution down to the actual significant concern, being the black South African population, we are still doing very poorly. So we're only bringing in 16%, and it may actually be emphasizing other minorities. Yes, they were previously disadvantaged, but what happens when we get to that state where we have the correct populational census presentation of the different minorities, and then it actually ends up overshooting the racial census, or the population census according to race. So then it may be a situation where Indian and coloured individuals will then be on the list of being next quota is actually we need to reduce the number of those individuals in the faculty. So it's a very difficult thing to navigate. And these are just some quotes from different professors. So race is at the forefront of every discussion. For new academic positions, so the discussion around wording of the advertisement is where this first happens. So when you're planning on advertising a post, the nature of the advertisement has to take into account the racial makeup of your division or department, and then how this post will seek to address specific transformation targets within the division or department and the university as a whole. So even right at that beginning stage, so it doesn't put hopes up for, say, a white individual. They'll actually say, we are only recruiting individuals who are within the black umbrella. I'm going to move on because I've got a very short period of time. So, as anywhere else in the world, there are considerable inequalities that exist still with female and males, or the distribution there. In 2004, there were reports of 30 to 70, and then 40 to 60 in 2015. Okay, so importantly here is that, yes, UCT has gender representation has been achieved, but not when you consider the different academic ranking systems. Okay. So across South Africa, 71% in professorial roles are male, and then and this matches international trends both in the UK and in the US. It's potentially, well, it's worse overseas. When you're home, sorry. Okay, gender bias is reported in the literature. So this applies to all. So this is research that's been conducted, and these are things that I think all women here should think about, and all men should think about, in the sense of when you have somebody, if you're line managing somebody, or if your colleague is unsure whether they're promoted or they're very humble about their achievements, say, hey, think about this. So women are less likely to promote themselves. However, when females do try to self-promote, I'm sure many of us in the audience potentially have heard this, they are seen as aggressive or angry. And then areas of research are not mainstream. Therefore, they do not achieve the same level of research exposure. However, this myth has been debunked, and whoever stated that, I'd love to meet them. Discouraged by the culture of senior male academics, and this can be a significant thing, so it's a barrier, i.e. their gender is discriminated against when more senior academic positions are considered. Male gatekeepers, vetting prior to recruitment is initiated. So even when you are obtaining your letters of reference or guidance on how to actually create your applications, can be a very difficult process if you're a female and you only have male mentors. Unless your male mentors are, a bit new age, let's say, or how would we actually frame it? I'm not sure. And then also, and this is a normal psychological process to maintain a homophily. You want to be around people that you understand you can network easily with. So we challenge convention. So males need I'm quoting what's written in the papers, so don't jump me. So males need to maintain a homogeneous group of men that have not been vetted by other men, that have been vetted by other men, and maintain their male dominant networks. And I think that was published in 2014. So very briefly, and I will be done immediately thereafter, is that, so Faculty of Health Sciences and Faculty of Commerce, lecturer, even split. So male, female. And I didn't choose the colors. PowerPoint did it for me. Okay. And then at senior lecturer that we see that then this starts changing, and then at the Faculty of Health Sciences there's a clear absence at the stage of recruitment that full professors or associate professors are actually being employed. Commerce faculty has done a dramatic turnaround and shift, and currently the dean of the faculty, who is my mentor who actually supervised me through this, is the dean, and there's quite a turnaround there. So, but at the same time, you can see that all of these are, that the male senior lecturers in the Faculty of Commerce, they will also then be wanting to opt for promotion as time passes. So, final statements. From the study conducted, race inequalities are being adjusted, likely not at the rate that we need, specifically with Black South African population. Warning to prioritizing other minorities within the umbrella term of Black, because this may also lead to extreme disappointment for those minorities. Referring to all races, okay, I've already said that. And then gender inequalities persist, and it's unclear when or how these will be corrected. UCT has implemented the employment equity strategy, and in addition, we've also developed transformation committees. So from the executive down, in the faculties and then in the departments, and in those environments we can actually discuss in open forums. Thank you very much, and apologies for going over time.
Hello, my name is Jinju from the KAIST, and I have thought, what should I say in this section? And the title was Diversity, Region-Specific Challenges and Solutions. I've never thought about the kinds of diversity deeply in my life. Sorry, honestly speaking. And then I just look at what kinds of countries are in the Asia-Pacific regions, and then see what kinds of characters we use. Actually, during my postdoc in the US, I have thought that so many people from the different country and different culture came to the US and worked together, discussed many things. And then I've never seen the kinds of things in Korea when I received my PhD. And I thought that what is the issue? And I realized that probably there's this kind of the alphabet that we utilize in different countries. So probably you read some of the characters like but you do not know what's this. That's Korean. 안녕하세요. So actually all the scientists, we can communicate in English, but they can come to the different country to communicate and perform some research together. But outside of the institute or university, it's not easy to stay in our country. So I think that is the issue, how I cannot see so many different people from the different countries during I grew up. But I believe that younger generation is getting better speaking English or the other languages too. So I hope this will get better soon. And then I'd like to mention about more gender inequality in Korea. So during the work, I need to communicate so many researchers around the world. And sometimes I cannot figure out the person who I communicate is a female or male. And somehow, I sometimes guess that person who I communicate is male. I just realized that by myself, with a really high frequency, I guess the person is a male, even though I'm a female and my thesis supervisor was female. But still, somehow, I think those people are the male. And actually, one of the YITP the ORD who trained in my lab last week, we communicated with email, and then we both thought both are males. And then both of us were so surprised, oh, you're a female? And then from that situation, I just thought, why I'm thinking that way? And I want to provide some information that was reported from the National Research Foundation in Korea last year. I think this was the first report showing the gender inequality in Korea. So this graph shows the ratio and number of the female faculties in the university and institute in Korea. And as you can see here, it is increasing. The numbers and the ratio of the female faculties are increasing, but still it is less than a quarter. And then they also shows the data how many faculties at different ages are existing in each university or institute. As you can see here, the younger generation, they are better. So they more female faculties are under 30s were occupied by the female. And actually, the Korea has a forced retirement. So I'm not sure over 60s how many faculties will be left. But as you can see here, anyway, it's getting better, the younger generation, and hopefully they'll get some tenure and then continue to keep this about 40% before their retirement. And actually, the previous one was about the whole faculties in the Korea, and this one shows faculties in STEM field. So science part still quarter, we kept the quarter, the numbers, but in the engineering department, female is just occupied less than 5%. And well, it was quite surprising, less than 5%, but more surprisingly, the grant received from the government in 2017, it shows more biased situation. So the male dominantly received more budget, the funded from the government, and the engineering department was even worse. They also showed the statistics about the richest researchers, the PIs in the university, and as you can see here, who received more than about $1 billion Korean won. You can find here 95% of the PI was male, and only 5% was female. In younger generation, so they are younger than 39 years old, only one female was receiving over the 500,000 Korean won. I was wondering who it is, but I still try to figure it out to learn how to apply the grant. But this graph shows that how the papers, publications were between the male and females. So this is the windows of the budget people funded from the government. And as you can see here, in many cases, the females can publish more papers compared to the male PI. So I think even though, well, definitely some parts male publish more, but because of this data, I hope people change their thoughts. So female scientists are good enough performing the science. Yeah. So actually, that's it. I prepared only just data, and hopefully we can discuss more after the presentation. Thank you.
Nice to meet you all. So I'm Amaicha Depino from the University of Buenos Aires. I'm CONICET, and my job now is to present some challenges about diversity in Latin America. And the first challenge that I faced was that I couldn't find data of Latin America, so I would mainly focus on Argentina and just mention some things that I think that are more general for Latin America. And in the end, I want to mention some actions and some things that have been done in Argentina, and I think that are, can be useful and some of us can implement in our institutes or our institutions. So if we look at the picture of the state of women in science in Latin America, the figure is very diverse. So you have countries like Paraguay where most researchers are men, and countries like Argentina where we have more or less half of the researchers being women. So this looks good, but if we look in details, we see that, for example, in private companies, the percentage of women being engaged as researchers are only 25%, and there's work where the highest salaries are getting. And also in the other graph, if you can see, I have no pointer, but you can see that if you look at the career of a researcher from the PhD to the highest position in the highest position in the CONICET, that is a National Council of Research, you see that we start with being more women in science, and then when we get to the highest positions, we only are 20%. So that's a figure very similar to what Dr. Bale showed for the States or in South Africa. So I think there are many reasons that we can think about why we are more or less the same in the early positions and why we are unbalanced in the later positions. So one I can mention is the parental leave. Only a few years ago, we started to have really regulated the maternal leave in PhD students in the CONICET. So before that, it was kind of dependent on who was the group leader and the director of the student, if she would get a maternal leave or not. So that's good. That probably make more women do PhD and finish, especially their PhD. And then on the other hand, we don't have paternal leaves, so all the job of raising a kid or all the impact on the career, or scientific career, goes to the woman and not to the man. So other reason why I think of people that really study this stuff think there's more women in science is that in Argentina salaries for scientists are very low. So men that can get better jobs, they probably will go to different jobs and women will stay in science. So that may explain why we are more or less the same in the first steps of scientific career. And then another reason that will explain this discrepancy that we see when we go further in our careers is that we still have a huge disparity in gender in the decision-taking position. So this is the picture of the plenary of all the rectors of the national universities in Argentina. There are almost 50 here, and you can see that there are only 6 or 7 women between all these rectors. But if we think about Latin America, I think gender is important because we are half of the population, more or less. But there's this concept that is used in general when we speak about disadvantages and diversity, that's called intersectionality. That is very important, I think, in Latin America. That is this idea that you have different layers that make you more unlucky to be successful in anything or to have access to some things like higher education. So Latin America is very diverse in terms of races and ethnicity. You have countries like Argentina where most of the population is white, countries like Brazil where almost half of the population is black or mulatto, and countries like Bolivia and Paraguay where half of the populations are Amerindians. So yes, that has to be taken into account, especially because regardless of the demographics of all the countries, white people always have more access to higher education than all the other population, unless the governments make an effort to make people have access to that. And the other thing is that Latin America is the most unequal region in terms of income, so we have the highest Gini index of all the world. So if you are a woman, if you are a black woman, and if you are a poor black woman, you have no chance to get to university, not even think about getting to science. So I want to end up with some positive actions that I saw in Argentina, some coming from the governments and some coming from colleagues. So the first one is a program that was implemented some years ago for the previous government that is called Becas Bicentenario, that was aimed to facilitate students to start and finish, especially finishing some careers that they consider that were that needed more people to access. And they were especially focusing on sciences and engineering. And I saw, at least in my university, the impact that this fellowship had, like people that were first generation coming to university, they ended careers like biology and they started PhD in biology. So I think when this kind of programs are very effective. Another program that was very effective, and also there are studies showing that has a huge impact in this gender balance, in Argentina was the program Raíces, that was a program for repatriation of scientists that both Agustin and I, that we are young IBRO, we went back to Argentina with this program. It was very important because repatriated people in different stages of their careers, from people that just ended at postdoc and people that had been abroad like 20 or 30 years and went back to set up a laboratory in Argentina. And this that I wanted to mention is something that happened a couple of months ago. There was a meeting about women in science in Argentina, and these 4 young neuroscientists went there. That is Verónica de la Fuente, Ana Ricciuti, Verónica Murta, and Noel Federman. They went there and they came back to their institutes with this idea of giving talks about gender perspective. And it was very interesting because they started in their different institutes and they put neuroscience as one of the issues. Why neuroscience research has a bias and what's the effect of that bias on women's health and women, the knowledge of the biology of women. And it was very interesting because the discussions there were really enrichment both for men and women, and they made many people to notice that they had bias that they really even acknowledged, like bias regarding how to address students, how to address colleagues, and how to think about their science they were doing. So I think this, I really like this because I wasn't involved in that, but it's something that any of us can do. So just talk about it and make it like an issue. And something that happened only last week in Argentina, that I think is a sign that things are changing, is that they were announced the 2019 CONICET Prize. They are the most prestigious prize that the government of Argentina puts for scientists, and out of 9 prizes, only 1 was a woman. So this is not new. If you see who won these prizes in the past, 70% are men. But this was the first time the community said, no, that's not good. So in the same day that they came out, there was a letter very well written saying this is not okay, they are not seeing us women as scientists, and only 24 hours later they already had 800 signatures of the community of science, both men and women, saying, okay, that's not good. So I think that's something that makes the hope that things are changing, that people are starting to think that that's not okay. So.
So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here, to participate to this meeting of the new ALBA Network. I'm very passionate about the representation and underrepresentation so far of women in science. I guess that's how I end up here. So unfortunately my presentation is mainly based on this bias, although I know in Europe it's also a problem for ethnicity biases, and it was actually hard to find data, so I decided to try to do a good job on the gender bias, and I'm focusing on that. So there is a recent publication that quantified only in neuroscience the women and men amount that are first author in papers. So you can look at this diagram, it's like, oh, that looks pretty good, so you have almost the same amount of men and women, although it's significantly more for men still. So that's a good start. And then you look at the last author, and it's like, oh, okay. So yeah, there's a clear bias here. And then you can keep looking at other metrics that are even worse, so prize awardees, seminar speakers, and conference speakers. So there's a lot of work to do. So that's specific for neuroscience. Although there's a positive message, is that if you look at these numbers across time, so the data doesn't go very far back, but for the last author, starting from 2009, you can see that we are going towards
a good direction. So hopefully in the next 10 years we can hope to reach a middle ground. And this is similar for the speakers as well in seminars and conference. So yeah, there's hope. Regarding so that was all neuroscience across the world. So if we try to think about region-specific problems, I based all my presentation on the She Figures 2018 report of the European Community. That is an amazing source of data, although it's not specific for neuroscience, so it's all science and technology. So here is all the graduate students of 2016, and it's the percentage of women. And in blue you have the average for Europe, which is 48%, so it's not bad. So we can start, it's like, oh, great. We're not doing so bad. Although, so some countries have even like higher percentage of women, so I need to do things. So I think the first one, yeah. So the first one is Moldavia with a 67%, followed by Iceland and Slovenia. And I would like you to note that Switzerland is only at 44%, as well as and France, Germany, UK, and Belgium are below the European average. So that is not so good. But then, yeah, we go to the women that are actually researchers, and then we go down to 33%. So yeah, again, it's the same thing that we have seen in other regions. There is this big drop at that moment. And here, if we look at specific countries, the worst one is the Netherlands with only 25%. France, where I'm from, is only 26%. Czechia is 27%, and Germany 28%. But again, there's like 5 countries that are above, so there's more women than men. It could be for good or bad reason. I actually don't know what is behind that, but it's still, I think, important to try to study that. So Tunisia, Armenia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Georgia are above 50%. Okay, so now if we go look at the authorships, this is for first author. So this would be as many men and women publishing first author paper, so only one country reached that threshold, which is, sorry, I missed it, but most of them are, almost all of them are below, so it's 33 countries. Then you're going to tell me, yeah, but there's only 33% women researchers, so it's kind of normal, so where is that 33% level? And that is here, so still the general average of entire Europe is below that, and most of the countries are below this 33%. So that's only for authorship. And then if you look at corresponding author, it's even worse. So again, if you look at the 33% threshold, all countries are below. And again, if you look at the richest countries, so Germany, Switzerland, France, and Belgium are even below the European average. So, what can we do about it? So I'm not here to give an exhaustive list of solutions. I just want to throw some starting points for the discussion that we're going to have after. To me, the most important is the implicit bias, because it's implicit, so it's not out there. It's very hard to address that point. There's many studies that have shown that. There's one that came out last month in Nature Human Behaviors that showed that selection committees are actually more biased when they're not aware of their biases. So the first step is that we get aware of our biases, and we all have biases. So one way that I think is interesting is to the Project Implicit. So it's a researcher in Harvard that did this database. So it's very important for individuals and for the research, because these data are further analyzed, and they look at different biases. So here is my larger diversity, not only gender, but there is obviously gender, skin color, weight, religion. So there's multiple tests that you can take, and it will give you a result. So it's a very simple task. It's not encompassing all the complexity, but it's a first step to get to be conscious of our biases. And then a second thing that I think is important is try to help each other and to question when people have gender biased comments and try to just mention it. And most of the time it was not intended, and it can bring another perspective to this conversation and encourage individuals to be more careful about it. And this is true not only for gender issues. Other problems that have, other solutions, sorry, that have been mentioned before, obviously, is education, the problem of parenting, trying to send this message that children is an equal responsibility for both parents, whatever their gender. Sending this message, so this is in school and at home, I think this is very important. Outreach is another aspect that is also very important, I believe, and to set role models. So for me, it was very important to see women higher in the power line of in my field, but I think this is fundamental for little girls to project themselves in this job and not think that there are boys and girls job, or that some jobs are not for me. You can do whatever. Like that's also for socioeconomic origin. And finally, I think for the region specificity, we could learn from the countries that reached parity. Try to look deeper, so I didn't take the time to really go in each of these countries and what are the mechanisms that brought this over-representation or equality. But I think that is a good route to learn and progress. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was very inspiring. So please, you can join us here, the speakers, and you can ask any questions to the speaker, or you can give a comment or your opinion, whatever. And then later on, we're gonna continue with the more casual networking event with a glass of wine and some finger food. So please feel free to ask questions. There is a mic here in the audience. So.
Have a question, it's more of a general remark. So I'm a Tunisian psychiatrist, but I've been working in France for a few years. I just wanted to say that in my home country, women are very well represented in science. And for example, when I was in medical school, it was, I think for my promotion, 70% female. So, but the only problem is that even if women are very well represented in the medical field in my home country, Tunisia, the problem is that when women reach a certain level, they don't really encourage the younger generation of female doctors. So the problem of equality is not just coming from male, but also from female. And I remember the first day I met with Professor Jinju, she thought I was a male, and I also thought she was a male, and we've been writing each other for 6 months. But I don't know why, in my head, she was the PI instructor, so I thought that she must have been a male.
Yeah, regarding that, I would just say one thing that indeed, like in the diagram, Tunisia is the top for, I think, the percentage of researcher, or one of the graphs that I've seen. And yeah, for the implicit biases, I think that is one point where women need to be very careful. And this is really for everyone. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Natalia, and I just wanted to make a quick comment, question. I think I really resonated when you guys spoke in different ways about cognitive diversity and how much value that can bring to teams. So I personally am very excited when scientists around the world collaborate. But then, I don't remember who, but brought up the issue of language and speaking English as an additional source of of bias maybe. So I was wondering if you guys could comment on like, have you personally felt like in teams that are very diverse, a hierarchy is created where the person who dominates the language a little more feels more confident to speak out their voice and give their opinion in a scientific setting?
So if I understood correctly, the languages maybe you're there. So language is one of the issue of the bias, right? So I'm also I felt the kinds of things before, but so one day I thought, why the Korean cannot be the language for the science? But that makes me much easier. My life will get much easier because whenever I speak in English, I cannot express correctly, and I cannot express everything that I think. And I just reached the certain idea. Probably my ancestor, they began all this type of the science. So that all the literature reported before were written mostly in English. That's why people try to use the English when we perform the science. And I think sometimes it's not easy to communicate because I cannot make a correct, I cannot deliver the correct idea. But I met many nice people, so they try to understand. They just wait for me until I express my idea. So I think, if more papers or more research results came from the Italian, probably people try to learn Italian to perform the science, I think. So I feel like now many people from the different countries just try to write the research paper in English. And my personal opinion is like, it may not change quickly. Maybe 1,000 years later it can change. Yeah, so, but I just thought that anyway we have to try to communicate, even though it is not the correct English or it is broken English. If we try to communicate, the other people who are not using the speaking English, they try to understand to each other.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So I went to the US to do my postdoc, and so my English sounds like very American now. But I felt that in the beginning, like what you're saying, when you're trying to say something and you're not quick enough, and people tend to get impatient. And I think this is more addressed to the English speaker, like they have to maybe try to work and like always remember how hard it is to speak another language. And yeah, this is a very important issue.
Thank you for a beautiful session. My question was more that, so a lot of the talk today centers around equality and diversity, and I'm wondering what your comments were, your experiences were in your country about inclusion, because you can have a very equal and diverse group of scientists, but if people don't feel like they're safe and welcome coming to work and that they're appreciated for who they are, it's not really going to make a difference. So I just wondered what your comments were about that.
So what the University of Cape Town has actually initiated and beginning to implement is awarding funding to different departments as they requested to actually have diversity workshops run to enhance our sensitivity across all of the different implicit biases that we have. First, a workshop, what are our central ones that are actually coming up in our culture, like say I'm in the Department of Psychiatry, so we will have a set culture of implicit biases and work through those with a facilitator who's actually outside to permit us the space and that safe environment.
So I can speak from the U.S. perspective on that as a woman scientist, and so I'm a center director, and our dean holds monthly meetings, the executive something, in his boardroom, and it's all of the chairs of departments and center and institute directors, and there are 3 women and 20-some men. Our dean is African American, but other than that, they are all older white men. And that sort of has a sort of carries a certain message at the table, as well as the fact that when you're in that room, it's a very long room with a giant table. Their pictures are all on the wall, and so you have the so it's not the mantle, but it's the equivalent of the wall of the dude wall. So yes, again, if you follow Twitter, this has been going around. So it's definitely the dude wall, absolutely. And so that absolutely, and this has been a discussion oftentimes in those settings as you work your way up, because there's fewer and fewer women and minorities that are at the table. It does become a very intimidating environment of feeling able to speak up, hear you have your voice heard when you look around the room and you are definitely in the space of the minority at the table, for sure. That is something I think that women and other underrepresented minorities at the table have to work on, getting your voice heard and having that confidence to feel comfortable in that moment at that table, which can be hard.
I think that you will start to change. Now we have the president, the secretary,
Hi. So my question comment kind of comes through the data that we saw in the last presentation, that I think like the amount of like women presenting in conference and less speakers like growing, but also the number of men actually decreasing. And sometimes like my concern is like if the message we are passing now is because we want more women in science, as we should, and like promoting more initiatives, but at the same time like I feel the message should empower that rather than assuming sometimes that the number of men in these positions should decrease. And I say this in a perspective that we know, like I get like a lot of activities in public engagement, and I do participate in a lot of girls like empowerment in the STEM fields and promoting more girls to continue in science or technology or math. But sometimes I also feel like the boys sometimes now don't feel as included as girls are. And sometimes I question myself, even though this is very important and kind of like to promote a more equal and must say like equal numbers of boys and girls like in STEM. But I feel like I wonder what these initiatives also promote, like in at least special, like in kids, like in boys, like what do they actually feel about it in the future?
Well, regarding the numbers, it's a proportion. So obviously, if you have more women, you will have less men. You cannot go around that. But in terms of absolute number, I guess we need more researcher in general, and we can have both increase, and maybe the women increase a little more to just reach this equality. And of course, for education, it's for both gender. I mean, for everyone. Like, there's no limit. We should send that message, like, you can do whatever you want as a job, and you should not be limited by social constructs, and you should feel free to follow your dreams.
Hello, my name is Anna. I'm from Ukraine. I am third year postdoc, so I don't have a question. I just have kind of suggestion. Ukraine, as you know, is a developing country, and for me, as for young researcher, the only opportunity to visit the conference is to apply for travel grants. And there is a big question that application of travel grants has age limits, and this limit is the same for women and for men. But I'm not only a researcher, I'm a mother. I have 2 sons, so I spend some time to give them a birth and to care about them. So whether it's possible to, add some additional months for women per one child for application. I realize that it's very hard to identify who is young researcher, who isn't, but I think that it might be time from your PhD, getting your PhD. I mean, not only age, but also it might be additional months, as I said, per child for a mother, for women in science. So, just a suggestion.
So you're saying that many travel awards are based on age rather than years post?
Yes. Travel. So I won a travel grant to get here, and limit of age is 35. I'm 35, so yes, and this age limit is the same for women and men, but I think it's kind of biased.
Sorry, is this a travel award from IBRO?
Fans.
From fans?
Yeah, yeah.
We should chat about that. I mean, typically,
yeah, it's
my
typically. I think that it's not a sorry, it's not a. I'm very grateful to get such an opportunity, but it's maybe nobody thought about it before, and maybe my voice will be the first. So please think about it. Thank you.
I have a question. So, really great talk. And I would like to ask, what about people with disabilities? So we didn't see any data, and I think they are minority too. We are studying people with disabilities, and we are here in focus with all diseases and trying to cure these things. But it's important to involve and do inclusion of these people.
I could not agree more. You're absolutely right, and we did not. I'm not even sure what level of statistics we have on that within science or neuroscience.
Yeah, I think that's the main problem. So for women, we know that 50% of the population, more or less, is women. So you have bigger statistics, and so for the other minorities, also you have a percentage for disabilities. It's really so few that I couldn't find any data. I looked for that and I couldn't find.
But it's great that you look.
In our human resources data, I couldn't extract that information because I did try and have an assessment and look at that. So yeah, it's just not really available.
Okay, Amadi from SONA. Just to respond to her comment, I think some of the panels we have sat in, the issue of using age has been waived. It's a matter of years post-PhD or years post your certificate. And I think some of the programs we've been involved in, there's a conscious identification of women issues, time out of research and returning to research. I think some of those are coming in now into some of the granting profiles. So probably that may become a common pattern to suggest. Secondly, just to the panel, I would like to have an idea of your experiences where you have a manager, either a male or a female, and their responses to issues that has to do with inequality in terms of whether a male or a female. It would be good to have a sense of that, to know what was the experience or what did you pick up. That if you have a female manager or a male manager, what has been their reactions to some of these issues. Thank you.
Well, as a senior member on this panel, I can share a recent experience that I have had, which did not go well, and I'm still very unhappy about, which was an experience of harassment, of which I brought up and discussed with my dean, and his response was, "No, I find that very hard to believe. Why don't the two of you sit down and work it out?" So, enlightenment is also a good thing, and putting forward and going above said issue to said dean's boss and discussing it, I think is helpful. But there are still, shockingly, despite the fact that we talk about this, that there's policies on this, that when faced with actual issues, it's amazing how hard it is still to get them addressed. So I still think, even in the US, I think we have a long way to go.
So I'd just like to add about the maternal and paternal leave. So it's a dual system. So there's a lot of change that we as women are requesting of men, and vice versa. So it's equal balance. It's not that we want to be, become some maternalistic, reverse of the old patriarchy. It's just that it's an equality, and through that equality we will enhance our culture and maintain we're going through so much translation and change, and we are in chaos. But in chaos, great change and great beauty can exist. So that's, I think, what everything behind what we want to say.
Yeah, I also wanted to add a comment on that point. I think there is a difference when you're like two parents or a single parent, and I feel like if you're a single parent, a father or a mother, it's important to take that in account and add time. But I think it's very dangerous to only give time to women because there is the birth time, so maybe it's a couple of months, I don't know, but raising kids, it's along at least 18 years, and this amount of time should be the same for men and women. So yeah, I would be more inclined to do like a single or dual parent.
Okay, yeah, thank you. My name is Sunday Bison from Nigeria. I don't know if I listened very well. It may be a silly question to ask, but I'll have to ask it anyways. I'm thinking, did you think of the economic statuses of these people? And what about the cultural differences? Does that not also affect how diversity?
For sure in the US, this has become both at college admittance, graduate admittance, medical schools, graduate schools. There is now a consideration also as a minority status aspect of socioeconomic background and hardship, for sure, is now included as a key piece. Marina, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to make a comment that one of the issues that I've seen the statistics on is that as positions become more equal, whether it's by sex or by race, salaries get lower and the status of the position gets lower. So as the status of a scientist in a particular country becomes lower, then you get more equality. So it's an interesting paradox.
In the South African context, there's a particular term which has been referred to the black tax. So because of the dramatic westernization and transition from rural to cities and work and money and Western influence, materialistic values which are quickly being put on and worn. Family members and many people that I know, if they have a secure job, they're not only funding themselves, their family, they're funding their parents, their sisters, their brothers. So they are always at an economic disadvantage because of the historical feed-on effect. So academia isn't the most monetarily defined job. So a big problem is also in South Africa is because all of industry needs to be affected. If we have strong Bachelor of Science students coming through, bursaries come through from private companies. Please won't you do a BCom? Because there we need you in finance. We need to get that sorted because we've got to hit our BBEEE, which is a terminology for equal representation, addressing our racial inequalities. So there are many things to be considered for us to actually effect the translation that we really need in academia. But as you say, is that as soon as equality enters a field, and this is a bizarre thing, but it happens, is that salaries will start to decrease. Through that, there is some random equality, but at the same, it's bizarre, is the bottom line.
I would like to thank you all.
So I'm Edmond from Cameroon. I'd like to know, as we talk about the bias, are we conscious about the female bias? Because when we say a lady or a girl child can do anything she wants, is that what we really mean, that she can do anything she wants? Or we want to force her to do engineering like the boys? In quotes. Because sometimes I've found out that unconsciously we are trying to force the girl child to be what she doesn't want. And as we strive for equality, we should also help them to do what they want really.
Yeah, maybe I can comment. So I have a 3-year-old. So the first thing I bought her was a track, because I said, okay, I want her to have a track. And you don't force them. You just give them the tools to choose the track or the doll. My daughter likes pink and likes dolls, and I can do nothing about that. So I have to admit that she says she's a princess, and I say, okay, but you can be also a prince. And I say, no, I'm a princess. So that's okay. You don't force them. You give them the tools to, if she likes, if that was the case, that she liked the track, she had a track to play with. Otherwise, if you don't give that, she wouldn't have it.
Yeah, when I was a little girl, people used to say I'm a missed boy, and that was very hurtful to me, because I was a girl and I didn't have this chance to do what I want. So I think what is important is to give the choice, and I feel today society is not giving the choice to actually the boys or the girls. So what is important is to give the choice. I agree.
I'd like to add also, like, if you address the socioeconomic factors, often, like, say, when I was a child, my dad was, he could only afford to be an engineer, okay, and that already sounds verbose. So he's just like, no, you've got to be a medical doctor. But I was a rebellious child, and there was no way in hell that it would occur. But the option is to, as mentioned, is to make the tools available, but it's not forcing an identity on an individual. It's providing the tools around so that they can identify themselves sooner, so they know their aspirations. And you know, if you want to be a creative, there's money there too. But the unfortunate thing is we're driven by a monetary system, and that also needs to be addressed and broken. How? It will be the challenge after we face this one.
Thank you so much. Thank you, speakers. It was really inspiring. Thank you so much. And thank you, the audience. Now we have 25 minutes. We have some wonderful finger food. We have some sparkling wine. So please join us.